Okay, let's get started. Good evening. Thanks for joining us. My name is Jackie Goodrum, and I'm the Associate Director of Legal Education and Virginia Policy for the Chesapeake Legal Alliance. Welcome to tonight's webinar, The Biggest Little Fish, the Menhaden Osprey Connection. Two things to note before I turn things over to my colleague, Haley Capone, to introduce tonight's speakers. First, this webinar is being recorded. We just want to make you aware of that. And if you've registered for this webinar, you will receive a recording in your email, so look for that in the days to come. And second, there will be time for questions after the presentations. If something comes to mind during the webinar, please put your question in the Q&A box or send a chat to us, the host, but we will answer questions at the end. All right, Haley, go ahead.
Awesome, thank you. Yeah, so we're really excited to have both Greg Kearns and David Reed here with us today. I'm development coordinator for Chesapeake Legal Alliance, but David Reed is the executive director, and he's working to protect the Bay through environmental law, and he will currently be discussing the legal efforts to ensure fisheries management decisions are following conservation standards, and also, how they're helping safeguard the Bay's living resources. And we also have Greg Kearns here, senior park naturalist and scientist with Maryland National Capital Park and Planning Commission. And he's been studying, the Patuxent River and Chesapeake ecosystem for over 40 years. He's a licensed bird bander and leading osprey expert. He and his team have actually installed more than 100 osprey nesting platforms and banded over 5,000 osprey. And so he's kind of focused on this, centennial species and studying why it is so helpful for the Chesapeake Bay ecosystem. So we're really thankful to have him here today. Dave, do you want to
Yeah,
turn it over?
thank you, Haley. I need to work on my picture. Next time I'll put that picture up of me wrestling a bear because I don't have a cool osprey handling picture. So just briefly, I'm about to turn it over to Greg. If you are not familiar, the Chesapeake Legal Alliance we're a public interest law firm. We provide environmental legal services to NGOs, community groups, as many of you here know, anglers, conservationists, watermen, river keepers. And we do it through our three centers. You can see here that the presentation tonight touches on all three, frankly, our legal education. This is also, you'll hear me talk a little bit about litigation enforcement and community outreach. And we're so pleased to have Greg here tonight to educate everybody on some of these issues. Greg, over to you.
All right. Well, welcome everybody to joining us tonight. And as she said, I've been working here on the Patuxent River at Patuxent River Park for the past 44 years almost. And we're here to mainly talk about ospreys. I was just giving you the background of the area where I do a lot of the work in the freshwater marshes here at Jug Bay. Now, the osprey, Pandion haliatus, is the second most widespread bird of prey in the world. There's about 1.2 million throughout the world. Probably between 30 to 200,000 pairs in North America. No one really knows exactly how many because of the remote areas. But the thing we do know, there's between 8 and 12,000 pairs in the Chesapeake Bay, which makes it the highest concentration in the world. The average, you can see the age and record is in North America is 28, 32 years old is the max for the European Union. Average lifespan I found is between 7 to 10 years. They mate for life, 5-foot plus wingspan. A 20-year-old might travel 150,000 miles in its lifespan. I wanted to show you this map. This map is a worldwide distribution of ospreys. Like I said, only the peregrine exceeds it in terms of its distribution. You see here in North America, all the way from Alaska across the northern tier of the United States and along the coastal areas, and they winter down in the blue in South America. We have the North American subspecies. There's a Eurasian subspecies. There's an Australasian subspecies too, and there's a Caribbean subspecies down here in the just south of Florida. Okay, let's try that. All right, now you can see I've kept records here for the 40 years that I've been tracking the osprey's arrivals. And you can see in the beginning it was around March, mid-March, St. Patrick's Day is the typical arrival. But if you notice, it began going down the time to as early as February, around in the early 90s. And we'd started seeing them. So I think it has to do with partly with climate change that the birds are arriving earlier and earlier over time. So this year they came on March 4th. All right, here's the, that's not the map. I'm not sure what you're seeing because there's a lot of hidden slides in here that there shouldn't be. Anyway, I've banded close to 6,000 birds, as she mentioned in the beginning of the past 42 years. I've used hundreds and hundreds of college students and volunteers and people who want to get into this field to get experience hands-on with the ospreys on all the various nest structures. Here you see an example of one of my assistants getting ready to tag one. Let's see if it'll play. It's not playing, of course, the way I wanted it to. Let me try this. All right, there you go. And you could see the osprey about took off his shirt for him, and you see the result of it on the right, where he had talon scratches on his back, and his shirt was ripped wide open from that. Here's some of the band returns of what you see. These are all birds I banded here in Maryland, or my former mentor, the guy I worked under. You can see the pattern, basically. The majority of the birds work their way down the coast through Cuba into northern South America. You'll see them in Venezuela, Colombia, and Ecuador and Brazil. The furthest I've had down in Brazil is almost 4,000 miles from here, down in the state of Rondônia. All right, let's see. Let's go on to this. Do you see an osprey with a big fish right now? Is that what you guys can see?
Yep.
Okay, great. All right, you see the osprey can pick up about 50% or more of its weight, from anywhere from a 2-ounce fish to 4 pounds plus. They need at least 300 to 400 grams, so about three-quarters of a pound of fish a day. Of course, that varies with the osprey. They have incredible, rapidly focusing eyes that are able to focus rapidly on a fish just below the surface. They have very light feathering on the legs, so it doesn't pick up moisture and water to hold them and weigh them down. You can see their long legs are about 1 foot long. Here you see osprey in the stages of this photograph. It's stacked on to show you the progress as they're about to strike the water. They bring their legs down in front of them. They close their nictitating membrane over their eye, and then you see them anywhere from 30 to 130 feet high. And they generally are successful about 1/3 of the time when they're diving, fishing. You can see their talons. It can close in about 2/100ths of a second. They have spicules or spines on the bottom of them, and that helps them grip them. They have one unique feature they have. Another one is a facultative zygodactyly, or reversible outer talon. This one here, it can literally help them in perching or in gripping fish. And you can see the size of the talons over here. One of my assistants holding a large female. You can see they have other adaptations on their head. The dark eye band acts as like an eye black on a football player to cut down on the amount of glare. Prominent crests to display their various moods to other ospreys. They have a brow ridge that shades their eye. Their sensitivity to UV light really helps them spot fish through the water surface. It creates better contrast for separating from the prey. You can see a male and a female here in this picture. Females weigh about 1/3 larger than males, about 1,800 grams or 4 pounds. Males are typically around 3 pounds or so at about 1,400 grams. Dense, oily plumage keeps them from getting soaked when they dive in the water. Males and females migrate in winter separately. They don't actually see each other for 6 months of the year, but they come back to their nest site. You can see on the right, that's a female with the brown necklace or patterning that really sets her apart. Here you see osprey's wings are very long and thin, but very stiff feathers that aid in hovering and lift. Hence, the V22 osprey is named for characteristics that ospreys demonstrate. Highly flexible wrist joint out here in the wing here, the dark area, actually allows them to hover, and really is amazing ability to hover and keep their head still. Here's Atlantic. Now, some of the main fish, they eat over 80 species, but the Atlantic Menhaden is their energy-rich, oily fish. Today, we're going to get into that. The gizzard shad, catfish, perch, those are freshwater species, sea trout. But there's really nothing better than Menhaden in terms of the oil and energy content. Here at Jug Bay, you see various fish species, like a gizzard shad and goldfish, I would name as the 2 top species I've observed that they consume here on a regular basis. Here on our nest cam, you see one is holding a gizzard shad with the other mate behind it. That's the male, 2 juveniles. Catfish you see over here. Catfish skull is the only thing they can't consume. They find in the nest all the time because it's too thick and hard for them to break up. So certain fish, like I said, are better for ospreys. The fattier, oil-rich fish provide the higher energy content essential for their reproductive success. The quality of that fish significantly impacts their health and their breeding outcomes. So that's very important. So just any old fish can do for now, but not necessarily give them the energy they need to accomplish breeding. Some of the nest platforms we put up, like they mentioned, over 100 towers here. We started back in 77, 78, first one, and then I kind of came up with a simpler design, and I've put them up. I even get kids sometimes to put them up. The 4-H group, you see, they did that one for me last year. This was us with a crew. We were just out 2 weeks ago repairing and putting up ones that the ice damaged. You see, these are nice brand new ones, replaced some of the ones that were gone. And to show you how dependent they are on towers, look at the number of nest platforms, artificial structures. The vast majority of them, ospreys nest on those. Look, trees, their natural native thing to nest on, is a very small percentage here on the Patuxent. Channel markers, duck blinds, and other things make up the rest. But that by far demonstrates the importance. Some things like jet skis, as you see in this picture, a guy's flying bridge on the boat, channel marker, the bridge over the Potomac River going into Virginia and Southern Maryland, all places you can find them on, odd places. So when they first arrive, they begin building the nest. The males come back, reclaim the site. The female usually joins within a day or maybe a couple of days before they arrive from their same trip. But it's amazing how they get here almost the same time every year. It's incredible, the adults, to reclaim their nest site. She'll then lay 3 eggs typically and begin incubation. The male will incubate some, but it's mostly done by the female. In this nest, it's kind of unique because ospreys do like to pick up bright colored objects. In this case, 2 flags, possibly from a cemetery, that are brought in with the sticks attached to them, a spine of a deer that had been butchered. It's cut by a bandsaw, a rag, and then there you see in the middle of their nest. I found all kinds of things, even Barbie doll laying in the middle of the nest, or a squirt gun. So then you see after about 35 days, the chicks hatch. You can see these chicks here on the left are about less than a week old, and the 2 on the right, 2.5 weeks old. Here you see 4 in a nest. This is extremely rare now. They don't really do that much anymore because they're not getting enough food. What you get is an asymmetrical brood, a chick that's being beat up by the older chick that hatched first. So when you get that, this bird, his head is pecked, it's partly bare, it's not developed near as much, even though they're only a couple of days apart. So that's bad. This is an asymmetric brood. We used to see these regularly. I mean, a symmetric brood. These are 2 chicks that are days apart, but they look almost identical. Here you see when they get to 8 weeks, 7 to 8 weeks, they're practicing flying and they're getting ready. They're stretching their wings. They look like almost fully adult-like at this point. If they've been eating well, three would survive, but you don't often see the 3-bird nest as much now. A juvenile on the left has an orange eye. Adult has that yellow eye, and you can see more markings on the head of the young bird. Now, some of the problems that faces them are guys right here spraying DDT back in the 40s and 50s really had a massive impact and caused a major decline throughout, the Chesapeake Bay and throughout North America for that matter. Eagles now have really come back. They are really starting to cause problems for them. Raccoons climb in many of the tree nests, and even my platform nest, if I don't have a predator guard, and the great horned owl probably kills 10 to 15% of them every year, eats the chicks from the nest. They'll drive the parents off. Fishing line, another hazard. You can see fishing line, chick here hanging from the nest that unfortunately had become mummified. Here's an example. I've seen legs severed many times. I often could save them if I'm there at the right time to remove the line, but here's one already in the process of being severed. This purple stuff is potato bags. The bird picks it up. Chicks often get tangled. Here's one just showing you the predation by eagles. I'm seeing this more and more. Watch this fast because this is on a nest in Maine. It happens so rapidly. Watch the eagles coming, ospreys chasing it, and the eagle literally snatched one chick. The other chick would manage to fly and made it out. So going on from there, here is another invasive blue catfish, which now is eating a lot of the fish ospreys eat. Here you can see this is a 39-inch blue catfish. Those were 100-pound catfish you saw the guys holding. The fish inside, if you look on the right, this fish is 13 inches long. It's a third of the length. This is exactly what ospreys eat. That's a gizzard shad, partially digested. Let me go on here. You'll see here you see another thing, weather, rain. There's 2 eggs that didn't hatch because of cold, wet weather. One chick only survived. Here's one that's soaking wet, but it's fully feathered and might make it. And a chick like this, younger, even though its crop is full of food, it's the only one left because of but at that age they're highly susceptible to rainfall. Hypothermia, pneumonia will kill them quickly. Now on to the last couple of things here. We're going to talk about the Menhaden. Keystone species in the bay, the Menhaden. It's often called the most important fish in the sea. The Atlantic Menhaden is unique in it filter feeds and converts the energy from phytoplankton and zooplankton into nutrient-rich biomass that top predators depend on. It can filter many gallons per minute, removing excess algae and nutrients. That's another important role they play. They're named bunker, pogies. Monowatiog is the Algonquin term for it, means fertilizer, because they often buried them like, they taught the pilgrims this, and they buried them for fertilizer. Revortia tyrannus is their scientific name. Here you see a prominent, nice view of an osprey carrying a Menhaden, and you see a yellow tail of one in the nest there. Okay, let's go on here. Some of the key nutritional differences of Menhaden. Again, it says in the main stem of the bay, Menhaden appear to be a non-replaceable component of the osprey diet, demonstrating their superior nutritional value compared to other available fish. It has a lot of omega-3 fatty acids, which are crucial for health. It's other fish species like flounders have much more water and fewer calories, so it requires more calories to consume them than they actually provide. And research in the bay recently has found that fish from high salinity waters were on average 40% lower in energy content than those from the fresh water fish upstream. Here's Menhaden, a little background on it. You see, here is a net. This is a purse seine being surrounded a school. They use spotter planes to find them. This is the factory down at Reedville, Omega Protein, that it has about 9 ships there, about 200 feet long. They're industrial level factory type ships that can do them. Here you see a net hauling in a large number of Menhaden, and you can see some of the species from whales to dolphins to ospreys, eagles, loons to fish like bluefish, the wahoo, striped bass, red drum, and sea trout all depend on Menhaden. Just some of the things that depend on it. Here's where they fish generally. You can see in the lower mouth of the bay in Virginia waters. It's banned in Maryland. It is allowed along New Jersey and Delaware, but here in Maryland, it's been banned. Purse seines are not legal to do it. This is an interesting report from Potomac River Fisheries in 2024. They had the lowest landings for the private individuals that fish for them of 692,000 pounds, a third of their all-time low in 61 years of recording. The low previous was 2 million pounds in the year before. All-time high was 20 million pounds in 83, but the average is over 7 million pounds. So that shows you a potential problem is developing. Also, at the same time, striped bass have declined 80%. It may not be all Menhaden. It probably is multiple factors, but that's one. There's been 4 major collapses. I'm not going to get into them in depth here. We don't have the time. But even while the coast-wide stock is not currently considered overfished, according to some assessments, population of the Bay region has shown significant declines in juvenile recruitment, older, larger fish that are becoming more rare to find. So these 4 collapses all were critical, all because of industrial overfishing from industrial fishing and recruitment fishing, taking them during the breeding, when they're in the breeding areas. So if you ever want to follow it, there's a Save Our Menhaden on Facebook. They show you what's going on, tells about it, but I just wanted to point that out. And the fact that there's this film called Biggest Little Fish You've Never Seen. If you want to know a lot about Menhaden, Google this. You can watch it online. It's free to observe. So this year, getting near the end here, wrapping up in a minute. This is Brian Watts in the center here, the director of the Center for Conservation Biology, with me, one of my guys, Alex, and his former grad student. We now are doing a cooperative program with other biologists around the bay, and you can see the Patuxent circled here. These are all the organizations participating, but we're surveying. The red is the high salinity, yellow is medium, blue is fresh water. So you see I have 2 distinct zones, blue, fresh, red, salt, brackish, the salt. The bay is about 15 parts per thousand. So just mind that as the fact. Here you see the Patuxent River. I broke it into my fresh one. I have basically 65 to 70 pairs in my area. The river, it's 45 linear miles from the top of this down to the mouth of the bay. It's down Solomon's Island. Typically, you see my 65 to 70, 90 to 100 pairs in that middle brackish section. And then in the higher salt area, there's usually 150 to 180 pairs. Well, this year, only 7 pairs actually produced, 14 chicks. And 7 of the nests failed. There were 14 pairs total. So that's less than 10% of the normal breeding population. Here on the middle portion, only 18 pairs we had produced 32 chicks. Normally, it's only 20% of the normal breeding population. And then you see up in my freshwater area, 28 pairs. So that was more than those two lower areas combined. We had 44 chicks, which is still low. We usually have had over 100. So 14 nests failed. So you can see that's about 80% of normal breeding. So just to give you an idea, the brackish areas, the trend is that they're suffering more wildly. So in the whole Chesapeake Bay in 2024, only 0.6 per active nest chicks were active in the main stem of the bay. Osprey nests in the main stem are no longer sustainable to population because the minimum reproduction rate needs to be 1.15 chicks per nest. It's obviously one chick below that completely. So this is a serious issue. The trend lines here show you a Patuxent River Act of the nesting trend. Every one of them, the nest sites have been trending down for the past 10 years. And you see also here that the major finding in 2025 with everybody who's doing that survey found that reproductive deficit is not restricted to the 10 parts per thousand salinity contour. It goes all the way to the 5 part per thousand, and this includes more than 80% of the surface water of the entire tidal Chesapeake. That's per Brian Watts on that after he compiled our data. And this just shows you my chick totals. The quick thing to point out here, the peak right there, 404 chicks. This year, 95, a quarter of what it was. And you can see some fluctuation, but it's never been seen. I've been doing this for 42 years. We've never seen the numbers now. It's really incredible how much it is. And you see now over here on the right, there's now almost 400 nest sites. So there's more nest sites than ever, but there's less birds producing. So here is another thing interesting. Watch these dolphins. This is interesting. These people talked about all these dolphins coming up to feed. This is something we've never seen. This is near the Solomon's Bridge, but they were coming 25 miles up into the river, never seen before. More than 100 dolphins. We believe they're foraging, looking for menhaden. In this school, this is how they fish for them. They're not finding them. That's why they're probably coming up here. They're not getting it. You see dolphins, they surround it, circle the fish, and then they get them. So here, this is it coming up the end. One thing that the Osprey menhaden story illustrates the scientific principle: everything is connected to everything else. The first law of ecology, and therefore single species management is ill-advised. And these models often ignore environmental changes that can lead to overharvesting and adverse ecosystem-wide shifts. I don't have time to get into more of that, but that's why we talk about the single species. So bottom line is ospreys are a sentinel species and symbol of the Chesapeake Bay's ecosystem and health. And that's why seeing these little young ones in middle-aged birds and then an adult, to continue seeing them in the numbers. I don't think they're going extinct, but I do believe they're definitely showing cracks in the whole armor. This is, Roger Torrey Peterson, the famous naturalist who also studied ospreys decades ago when DDT was still the issue. He said birds are the sensitive indicators of the environment, a sort of ecological litmus paper, like a test indicator. Observation and recording of bird populations over time lead inevitably to environmental awareness and can signal impending changes. I love that, and that's why people ask me, why do you do this? People used to say, why do you study ospreys? There's plenty of them. I said, one day there may not be as many, and here we have reached that day.
There we go. So we'll jump right into this. I'll talk fast because the osprey stuff is the interesting part. What we do with the most important fish in the sea is an important question, of course, right? Greg talked about marine mammals, humpback whales, incredibly important for those, dolphins, obviously osprey. But think every predator fish species, and everybody's familiar with striped bass, red drum cobia, bluefish. It is the keystone species and is considered the most important fish in the Atlantic. So who manages it? Well, at the highest level, it's the Atlantic States Marine Fisheries Commission. They set, as you can see here, the coastwide cap for all of the Atlantic states. And that's an important point to make, because what you have to remember is, regardless of the fact that there is this commission, which is essentially a compact between all the coastal states, they allocate 3/4 of that allocation to Virginia. So 75% of the entire coast's allocation goes to one state. And you can see I just put the breakdown of New Jersey and Maine here. The reason that that's important is, one, it's an eyebrow raiser. 75% goes to Virginia. But the reason for that is the sole remaining reduction fishing company, is in Reedville, Virginia. So 3/4 of the entire coast's allocation goes to one state because it has the reduction fishing company in it. And you see at the bottom there, almost all, 90% of Virginia's allocation goes to that one company. And so that means over more than 2/3 of the entire coast's catch goes to one reduction fishing company. So the reason I bring that up is, one, just so people can wrap their heads around what that really means. And the other is all of the other fishing that goes on, whether it's purse seine or not, is for bait. So bait is for crabs, lobsters, sport fishermen. Bait is used widely, and it's used up and down the coast. In these other states with their allocations, that's all bait fishing. In fact, the reduction fisheries were closed in every other state except Virginia. Virginia just holds on to most of the catch. So, how do we regulate such a thing? Well, there is one regulation so far, and it's the Bay Cap, and it was set by the Atlantic States Marine Fisheries Commission. Several years ago. It's been changed a couple of times. Right now it is at 51,000 metric tons, which is meaningless to most people. It's about, I think that's about 120 million pounds, something like that. So you have to kind of think about the magnitude of these things. The total allowable catch for a given year until very recently was 350 million pounds for Virginia every year, which is just an astonishing number. And one of the reasons I want to put that number out there is bycatch has been estimated, I think, very generously, so very conservatively, between 2 and 5%. These are very tough numbers to get. It takes a ton of industry cooperation. You can imagine, I've known a couple of people whose jobs have been to go out on these vessels. You have a détente with these people, right? You're out there, out on the water, way out on the water, observing. So, the idea that bycatch is accurate, I think, is a misunderstanding. I think 2 to 5% is probably a low estimate, but just think of what that means, right? You're talking about just in the estimate of bycatch, right? Something like, I don't know, 10 to 15 million pounds of bycatch every year. Think about what that means. You just heard me list all of the marine species that feed on these schools. The net sets are, football fields wide. So just consider what that means for the bycatch. And I think we forget about that all of the time. So with that in mind, really the way that this species is supposed to be regulated is by the Virginia Marine Resources Commission. And I put some of the laws up here, but basically they regulate Virginia waters. And they have to follow the law that Virginia adopted. Looks a lot like the Magnuson-Stevens Act, which has these national standards, and they do the things you would expect them to do, which is to maintain, management based on conservation, based on optimum yield so that it's not overfished, to provide fair and equitable allocation, not just for economic benefit. The law actually in Virginia was written almost identically to the national standards of the Magnuson-Stevens Act. And that's important to keep in mind. No measure shall have economic allocation as its sole purpose. That's an important one to remember. Fair and equitable to all fishermen. Reasonably calculated to promote conservation. I mean, these are things that are these are not interpretations, right? This is the statute talking. And I think the Marine Resources Commission will state publicly that they're managing the fishery, but what I've put up on the slide is not hyperbole. They have never restricted the industry, not once, not ever, not by a single fish or a single nautical mile or a single day. I mean, I think everyone should, that's an arresting fact. We brought, so what do we do about this, right? Omega protein, until the case that we brought over the past few years, and in some ways is still ongoing, until we brought the case, we didn't really mention Omega, but they intervened in that case. But they are one of the biggest donors to a lot of legislators out there. And they are, which is their right, and they are heavily involved in every study, in every work group. They're heavily involved in interpreting the science for some of these work groups at both the state and federal level. And it has created what I perceive as regulatory capture. There is not a political will to regulate this industry. And so I put up these numbers now, which are now old numbers based on the fall. So the Virginia Commission has to stay under the ceiling, under the maximum of the federal commission, the Atlantic States Marine Fisheries Commission. They released 2 reports, and the scientific recommendation very clearly, very unambiguously, was talking about 50% reductions to prevent, in order to have what they called a 40% probability that protects against overfishing, so a cushion. And that's not particularly precautionary to protect conservation. That's just to have a cushion so you don't have a collapse. And it's a good thing that the single species stock assessment did that, because what they realized is that for the past many years, they had overshot the total allowable catch by approximately 50%. However, that was unpopular politically. So the board at the ASMFC chose to do a 20% reduction. Ironically, the multi-species work group, which looks at things like striped bass and osprey, in other words, conservation-based decision-making, and it's all modeled, also recommended at least a 50% cut in the harvest. Still, they went with 20%. So they essentially ignored the science. So I say that because this is an AI-generated horse for horse trading. I say that because, we brought a lawsuit a few years ago. I think it's finished. It hasn't been published. It's just sort of sitting in limbo. The agency, the VMRC, has said nothing. The ASMFC changed the tack, cut it by 20%. The agency is silent. They are relying on a now more than 3-year-old regulation that we think is illegal, that is unlawful. And they have said and have done nothing. There's right now a petition for rulemaking. We have filed 2. This one is not ours. It looks a lot like ours. And we've commented on it. And the agency is supposed to answer it. But right now, May is coming. The fishing season's coming. And they have done nothing. So, we have a new administration. We have a new Secretary of Natural and Historic Resources and deputy secretaries who are very sensitive to this issue and responsive to this issue. And in my opinion, very good. This is good government, and they're very practical. I don't think they'll make any wild swings, but call them. Call your legislators. Don't stay quiet on this. We brought the lawsuit because we think talk can be cheap. I worry that there are a lot of study bills that have gone back and forth, and there's potential money, there's potential congressional money. But, I think what the Bay needs is some precautionary management. I think what we need is to train this agency to manage this reduction industry because they had just simply have refused to do it until now. And we think it's time. We need to train the Marine Resources Commission to start to get used to regulating this industry, because instead what happens is everybody suffers. And, for example, in 2024, Omega could only catch 80% of its harvest. And that's an important thing to remember when you look at what the ASMFC reduced the TAC by, 20%. So if you're Omega, you've lost nothing because they couldn't catch 100% of their harvest. The bait fishery, I'm astonished, isn't more upset, frankly, because they lose. Because in Virginia, they only get 10%. So they are going to end up losing, but Omega loses nothing because they couldn't catch that anyway, because they have to go further and further out these days. And the reason I asked Greg to put that picture up is because you have this sort of French horn-shaped fishing pattern. When you look at, I'm kicking myself for not having the map up on the slide, but when you look at that next slide is so I can ask you to give us all your money, but I'll get to that. You can see that the pattern, the industry says, well, we fish responsibly. I don't know what that means. All I know is, and all the data shows, is that they have spotter planes that cover the entire water mass, right? The spotter planes scour the skies of the bay and the mouth of the bay. They don't want to go out into federal waters. Why? Because it's farther. It's more gas. It's more time, right? It's more hours and rougher seas. I get that. That part I get. But the rest is money, right? It's money. So they send the spotter planes out and they scour everything in the bay and at the mouth of the bay. Then they go out into federal waters. So I want people to understand, and this is something I struggled. It's such a complex regulatory scheme, and the science is very complex. The models are this Rube Goldberg device of these Bayesian, these like Monte Carlo method Bayesian probability models. And they're incredibly complex. They are based on incredibly old data and updated periodically. And they're easy to get wrong. And they've gotten them wrong recently. And we feel very strongly that precautionary management is absolutely necessary. I mean, you cannot just say, well, we don't have definitive evidence that there's about to be a collapse. And then the federal commission says, we came close to a collapse, we better do an emergency measure, and then do nothing at the state level. So I want to leave time. I have more to say on that. And, we are continuing with our litigation strategy. We think it's probably a good time. We think it's a good time with the commission and the new administration. We think the new numbers speak for themselves. The VMRC said it, without any ambiguity during litigation previously that they have to rely on the science, and the ASMFC science said 50%. The political body said 20%. So the VMRC has been dead silent. They're whistling past the graveyard on this one. So we're waiting to see what happens on this petition. Speaking to the administration, but they should hear from you. They should hear from people they're not used to hearing from. Call them up, write an email. But I want to leave time for questions.
Yeah, thank you both so much. Thank you, Greg. Thank you, Dave. We have some time for questions. Please put your questions in the Q&A box or send a chat to the hosts and panelists. We do have one question already in the Q&A, which is, what are the products that Omega Protein makes from the Menhaden?
Pet food and aquaculture food. So they make, I think, 4 different products, but the vast majority, ironically, goes to like salmon farms in Canada. It's a Canadian company, so a lot of it just moves up and goes to salmon farms or for pet food. That's the majority of it. Greg, you're muted.
go on mute. I saw that similar to what you said in China. That I saw some film about showing them that they were feeding to salmon, literally, fish from the bay halfway around the world were going to another, another resource when everything in the bay, needs that fish. So,
Okay,
Yeah,
so we
I'll address something that I've heard before and I've seen in other questions. You don't want to have pie in the sky ideas, but I've heard a lot of people talk about, if we're going to do this, why are we not talking about, if we're going to invest money, why are we not trying to convince Omega to convert to now I don't know if it has the same, I don't know if it's possible to process blue catfish, but I've heard that idea many times. I don't know the technical feasibility. It's easy to throw that out there. It may not be economically feasible, but it's one of the biggest invasive problems in the bay. And, you would love to be able to incentivize these companies to continue operating because it is a concern. There is a political issue there. It is at least a couple hundred full-time jobs and, another 150 seasonal jobs. So it's not, we certainly, and I think most people in the coalition trying to regulate this industry do not take that lightly. I mean, that's an important issue, and it has been an important industry and an important source of jobs. And, they are out on the water. I grew up fishing. I grew up on an island. I don't think anybody sneezes at that, but it's just, it's too many boats. It's too efficient and too effective. And the quantity is way too big.
Okay, so we have several other questions in the chat. So I'm going to combine two of them. So what's several people are asking about who do we contact, what government representatives, and what is the best way for us to contact our representatives? Someone commented that they saw something recently that Omega is actually international, and does that make a difference here?
I'm going to turn that over, Jackie, to you, our public
Sure.
expert.
So I would say, regardless of whether or not you are a Virginia resident, if you're a Maryland resident, this obviously also impacts you. If you are a Virginia resident, there's a website called Who's My Legislator, and I will put it in the webinar chat, and you can look up and see who represents you in your district. Additionally, you can find out who are some of the representatives who have perhaps sponsored bills that would actually regulate this industry. I'll give an example. Delegate Carr sponsored two bills this past session, both of which were defeated, that would have done something to establish quotas, requiring the Virginia Marine Resources Council to actually establish quotas on Menhaden, as well as halting the reduction catch until a study was performed that showed that this was actually sustainable for the bay. So she is a delegate worth reaching out to. But you always want to talk to the people on the committees that legislation related to Menhaden are on. So that would be in Virginia, the ACNR, the Agriculture, Chesapeake and Natural Resources Committee. They're great people to talk to about this issue. Also, reach out and contact officials in the Spanberger administration. We spoke to one agency or one official recently who told us that every day they hear or see the term Menhaden either in meetings or in emails that they receive. So
Which is good.
Which is good.
Good.
Yeah, this is a popular issue.
And call Josh Kurtz's office. Call Josh Kurtz, Secretary Kurtz at DNR. Yeah. Call his office at 9 a.m. every morning until he talks to Governor Moore, until he talks to, Attorney General Brown. Get in his ear. We've been in his ear.
Yep.
He should feel the pressure of hearing from his constituents that one company is stealing not only all of the bait fish, but destroying this ecosystem. Think for just a moment from Maryland, all the blood and treasure we spend to protect water quality and protect the bay and protect the ecosystem. It's just astonishing that it's not more of an issue on the Maryland side.
Yeah, and that's a really good point, is that if you are a Maryland resident, make a big deal with your representatives and with the people in power there, as well as you can always reach across the Potomac and reach out to Virginia legislators and Virginia officials, but they're not going to listen to you as much because you don't live here. But if Maryland makes a big deal about this to Virginia, then something might actually be done about it. Let's see. So there's several questions about the petition for rulemaking. Could you speak just a little more about where that is, Dave, and what's the status?
So, you know, this was good. It was a good thing, and we know the author. I'm glad she submitted it. The timing was inconvenient for our litigation, but you know what? It was a good petition. I put in a 3,000 word comment or 3,000 character comment because it was, it's good. It's going to force once again this commission with new leadership, which it desperately needed. It needs new advice and counsel. I would like to see a new assistant attorney general in there advising a new commissioner to really allow, in my opinion, step out of the way, educate the commissioners and board members, and step out of the way and let them make good decisions instead of, in my opinion, being captured by this industry and being terrified of regulating them. So I think the petition's a good thing. If anyone's followed what we've done, frankly, it rhymes with our previous petition. It asks them to follow the law. It asks for immediate action. I think it asks for a temporary moratorium is the gist of it. But it details the Magnuson-Stevenson Act, and it details Virginia law that I had put up on our slide. So I think it's a good thing. We'll see there should be a hearing coming up in the next month or so, I think, is the timing for that. They haven't advertised it yet. So show up, we'll advertise it when it comes out, when we get a date. But it should be sometime in April. We'll be there, certainly.
And for those who have been asking about, do we have talking points on this issue? Haley put in the chat a one-pager about Menhaden, and that will provide some talking points for you to use in your conversations. We have one question also about, can we repopulate Menhaden in Maryland, or do they migrate through Virginia?
The latter. That's a good question. They say that the schools used to be like the stars, that they were just everywhere at one time. And now, I think you get a lot of, anecdotal data is still data, but it's hard to rely on. So you get a lot of people that say, I just saw 2 schools, there's plenty. And you'll get people that say, I used to see 10 schools all the time, so 2 is nothing. So I can see why people want the science in the Bay. This is going to be a potentially controversial thing to say, but I should preface it by saying I used to study estuaries. Now I did demersal populations and not ocean moving forage fish like Menhaden, but I do understand the science. And I think at this point, the science has become a distraction because it's, in my opinion, constantly co-opted. There are people that lead these research groups, in my opinion, also very unpopular opinion, that like to have long-term research lab funding, frankly. And I don't think they're going to come to a conclusion. I think in 7 years, they'll say, well, we think we know. We're not sure. You know what we need? Another $3 million for more data. I mean, we have enough data to know that they have to have precautionary management. That's it. And the studies should go on now. The studies should start now. But, to quote Heather Lusk, a former commissioner, board member, who was not pro-regulation at all. In fact, I think she was probably more on the industry side. A few years ago, or 2 years ago, in response to one of our petitions, now the vote was interrupted by somebody who had a stake in the industry, financial interest in the industry, another board member, interrupted that vote, literally. But she said, well, if we regulate now, the study will happen immediately because they'll find funding for it. and everybody's breath was taken away. I thought, oh, good, we did it. They're going to regulate. But one of the Lynn Kellum, who is a part owner of a shipyard with an interest in the maintenance of the fleet, so direct financial conflict, interrupted that vote with an alternative motion, so it never got heard. So, let's hope that this next vote, this next petition hearing and next vote properly considers this. And again, contact Secretary Bulova and Deputy Secretary Kotula. They're very good. They know, they understand this issue. Contact the commission. Tell them to regulate. They have the authority without question. They have the flexibility. So that key moment is very important.
Hey, David, I see one question. It says, why is Omega not engaged to resolve this issue through science? You started addressing that a minute ago, kind of on that line. What would be your answer to that?
Yeah, I've probably overused this line, but I like Upton Sinclair. And he said, it's difficult for a man to understand something when his paycheck demands he not understand it. I mean, I would not count on the industry to come out with the best science that says that they shouldn't be depleting the bay in the mouth of the bay. I would not count on that. Very unlikely. I think they should have to pay a fee. I think they should support the science financially, right? I mean, they pay, this is interest, they pay about I hope I get this right, about $1,000 a license for their boats. Think about that. $1,000 a license for their boats. When they have, so it's not just their mothership vessels. They have smaller vessels, but it's something like 11 or 12 licenses. So do that math. They until very recently, the fishing season hasn't started, 350 million pounds every year of a public resource. 350 million pounds for $12,000 in licenses. That's a deal. I want part of that deal.
And that's around probably 500 million fish you're talking about.
More.
500 million.
That's right. More.
Yeah,
right.
So we are at time, but we do have one more question that I just wanted to ask from the chat, which is, I'm going to reframe it a little bit. What can Bay advocacy organizations like CBF and CLA do with this issue? What could they be doing?
I mean, I think you have to push really hard. I think the time for, I was glad to see CBF be a little less polite about it. They now are talking about moratorium, but I'd like to see them join us in litigation, frankly. That'd get everybody's attention. CBF is listened to at the legislature. I think it's good to say we want to study, but I think those bills should not be floated without a required regulation that leads to the funding, because otherwise we will have studies and requests for funding for the next 7 to 10 years and no action. And we know it's depleted. You have 2 inches of water on the floor and a 6-foot hole in your ceiling. You don't check for leaky pipes. We don't check, let's check for, what about climate change and zooplankton? What about this? What about that? We know, 350 million pounds and soon to be 280 million pounds every year being taken out of the bay and the mouth of the bay is what's depleting Menhaden regionally. Not, it's possible that it's some secondary factor too. But I would like to see CBF be a little bit more aggressive, and they're starting to do more, which I'm very pleased about. They do work at the federal level for more federal study at the ASMFC, and they do good work there. I'd like them to see them push 10 times harder at the Virginia level, in my opinion. But CBF does good work all around, and this is something that they're starting to move on. So I'm happy to see that. But join us in litigation. That's what I'd like to see. Be great to have them as a party.
One thing I wanted to point out too was last year the a lot of ospreys we saw sign and evidence of starvation in the nest, dead chicks over the last 2 years. But the Menhaden didn't really come into the bay where Omega moved into the bay until very late in the summer because there weren't any there. They were fishing off the coast of Delaware and New Jersey. So if they're not in the bay, it's because the fish weren't there. So what does that mean to the ospreys and other organisms that feed on them? It means basically you're starving. So many ospreys we saw did not nest because they physiologically did not have the energy levels to produce eggs and go through the incubation. It takes 35 days. It's a large investment of energy. And if the fish that they depend on, about probably 70 to 80% of what they eat in the higher brackish area are menhaden. And if they're not there, that's why the reproduction, we believe, went down. I mean, it's not 100% proven, but we're working on that. That's why we're doing these bay-wide cooperative with multi-organizations to look at. But that was one of the unusual late returns of menhaden in, and I still don't think the numbers were that high when they did. But the problem is ospreys need them from April and May until early in mid-July, and they weren't there. So that means the production was, you saw my numbers, they were off the charts bad, nothing we've ever seen before. So, and mainly in the saltwater brackish areas, not as bad. All the freshwater areas had more production around the entire bay that we surveyed over 1,200 nests through Brian Watts's leadership on that. And it was a definite trend. Freshwater doing better, brackish and salt where menhaden are much worse. So.
Should we cover anything else? I know we're over time.
I think we've got everything, but yeah.
All right.
Thank you everyone for attending. Be on the lookout for a follow-up email with the recording as well as talking points and information about the Osprey Festival. Have a good evening.
Thank you, everyone.